Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord Q&A service. I am here with John Vervaeke once again. Thank you, John, for being here.
Always a pleasure, Brett.
And I'd like to introduce you, John, to Andre, who I think you've talked to a few times. Andre has taken on the role of admin on our server, and we're very happy to have him in that role.
Welcome, Andre. It's great to see you taking a more active role. I'm really happy to see that.
And Andre, did you can you could say hi to John. You could, I don't know if you had started talking or you can unmute.
It shows him with his mic muted right now.
All right. So okay, Audrey was going to ask. Audrey will come back in a minute. So let's get to the question. So the first question is from last time from Julian. What are your thoughts on the concept of natural law? Today, natural law seems often to be confused with a sort of Darwin survival of the strong kind of vision of things. How are ancient conceptions of natural law different? And how does something like natural law fit into your own thinking?
So it's correct, Julian, to say there's a difference between the modern and the ancient notion. So one of the significant differences is, for us, the notion of natural law has been reduced to just a statement that can be captured within the hard sciences. That is an explanatory principle about the universe. Like force equals mass times acceleration or something like that. These are the laws, the deepest regularities and patterns that science is able to discover, typically understood within physics, a little bit extended in chemistry, and then by extension, things like evolutionary principles are considered sort of equivalent to natural law within biology. The ancient notion is much more extensive than this. So in the ancient notion, and this is where the term is often used within sort of legal philosophy, natural law extends to the idea that there are moral normative principles that are constitutive of the nature of reality. Namely, these principles would exist in the universe even if there were no human beings, and that these principles of natural law form the ultimate metaphysical basis of whatever laws human beings try to pass. So examples that we might consider are, that it's always wrong to murder innocents or to kill innocents. Now, the problem for us is we're in this weird place post-Kant where we simultaneously assert that there are universal principles such as that, or principles around the equal treatment of different groups of people that some are supposed to universally apply, and yet the basis for that, where that exists in reality, is very, very nebulous. And this, of course, has all kinds of difficulty for us, because one of the problems facing that sort of moral universalism is, well, how do those moral universals actually interact with the physical universe? If they interact, well, the argument is, well, they interact through us. We have a moral sense. Yes, but how do we as natural biological beings interact with something that's not physical, non-biological? And this is a standard problem. Now, the reverse position, that there is no such thing as natural law, in that sense, that all we're doing with law is stating social preference, maybe democratically decided upon, and we choose democracy not because it's ultimately right, but because it's the most efficient for achieving our goals of self-correction, or some such case like that, is you face a lot of deep Platonic criticisms that, first of all, you are still assuming that there is a normative standard that exists somehow, truth. And if I ask you what kind of thing truth is, you'll find that you're facing all the difficulties you face with goodness. And because, how much does truth weigh? How big is it? What's its molecular structure? None of these make any sense. And so the problem you have is if you say, well, I don't believe that there's any such thing as truth, you're into a very self-defeating position. And also, if you say there's no universal goodness, it's all just a matter of convention, then you have no basis by which to criticize evil regimes like the Nazis or Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution, etc. Because if that's right, although the behavior of those regimes was in concert with the laws they passed, and then you'll say, but those laws weren't passed democratically. Why does that matter? Right? Unless there's a universal principle that says democracy is the best way or the most justifiable way in which human beings should live, then you face a lot of problems. Now you can then say, well, it's ultimately down to sort of human nature, and then you're into problems about there being universal human nature, and then again you require universal truths. So where we're at right now, and this is something that Habermas made famous, is we're in a very difficult position where we are doing something that is on the border of being an ongoing contradiction. We assert universal law while also claiming it has no place within the universe as we understand it, which means we are saying something is extremely valuable, but we have no explanation for how it exists or how it affects our behavior if it were exactly the kind of universal law. Now, this is one among many reasons why I am trying to come up with the help of a lot of people, a naturalistic view, a naturalistic version of Neoplatonism, and the integration of an emergence and emanation metaphysics to hopefully try and give us the framework to break out of that kind of bind that we're in. I happen to think that the basis for why we have this divide, an argument coming from Hume, the is-ought fallacy. There's going to be an episode with Zach Stein and Greg Enriquez and I on Towards a Metapsychology That Is True to Transformation, where I basically go through the critiques undermining the idea that there is no way, inferentially, no way to reason from is to ought. In fact, that piece of Enlightenment cultural cognitive grammar is under serious attack right now, and for what I would argue are very, very good reasons, some of them quite philosophically profound. And what that means is there's a real opportunity to move to a different ontological worldview that would get us out of that bind that we're in. We're nowhere near that, and I'm not claiming I'm going to get us there, but I'm hoping that my work will help to contribute to the work of others who might get us there. That's the best answer I can give right now, Julian.
Thank you. And Andre, I think your sound issues have been fixed.
Thanks, Brett. Hi, John. It's good to hear from you. I hope life is going well for you right now and that COVID isn't too bad over there. I don't know what it's like where you are.
It's pretty good right now. We're basically open, but there's concerns around the Delta variant. But the majority of the population is now double vaccinated, so we're kind of doing a wait and see.
It sounds great. We're in lockdown right now here, but wanted to firstly say, being the co-admin of this server now, I'm happy to make this Discord the best place it can be. And you've heard my comments across this journey a couple of times in the Q&A, and my thoughts about your work. And I'm very, very happy to lead this on. Because I think the search for meaning is one of the most important things in the world today. So I'm fully behind this.
Well, I'm very
Now,
pleased to have you here.
thank you. My question is that has been something that's been brought up a few times in the Discord and via a few members, is that about Retina. Now, I've not really read anything up about Retina or watched any videos, so I'm coming from like a standpoint of kind of knowing nothing, knowing like a brief idea about it. Um, and a friend of mine said, so Retina seems like it's trying to get the good qualities of religion um, and embody them. That what are the good qualities that come from religion, and what are the bad ones that religion brings that Rittenhouse is trying to avoid? Uh, is it possible to like give a list of like three or four concepts or qualities or traits, and the reasoning of like why these things are either bad or good? Um, it,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think so. Um, I expect that the community is already far beyond anything I'll say, um, but I will say what I've had in mind when I talk about this topic. What are the good things about religion? Is religion is a way of a way of activating and accentuating and celebrating our sense of religio, our sense of connectedness. Um, and I would argue that reverence, especially reverence for the sacred, is an especially important way in which we intensify our experience and our recognition of the centrality of religio to meaning in life and to our agency and to the agent arena relationship that grounds and makes possible much more specific meaning systems like legal systems and moral systems. So there's a meta meaning function, there's a religio intensification function, and importantly, when those two things are working, there is a homing of an ecology of practices, setting an ecology of practices within a community and a tradition, and that's important because that gives ecology of practices a grounding in the collective intelligence and hopefully the collective wisdom of distributed cognition that can help to create and curate the community of practices. And that leads to, if all three of those are working properly, then religions are the best places, and we seem to have empirical evidence to support that, for the cultivation of wisdom, virtue, and meaning in life. The fundamental problems with religion, as I see it, is that all of the world religions are still committed to a two worlds mythology that is not really viable for us anymore, given the success of the scientific worldview, and that religions have, in general, dropped the ball in terms of properly homing, curating, and cultivating ecologies of practices that can be properly integrated with the kind of world in which science and technology play the fundamental, even as Heidegger would argue, ontological role that they do today. And religions have often replaced dealing with this issue with the attempt to impose a worldview in contrast or in opposition to a scientific technological worldview, and this has led to various forms of oppression, abuse, and exploitation. Now, I want to make very clear that these are not problems unique to religion. The state and the market are also, I think, similarly corruptible and have had histories of such corruption, by which they also step into the vacuum of the meaning crisis without actually addressing it. And, for example, political systems have drenched the world in blood as they've attempted to do this, and the market has done some often horrible acts of exploitation. So my concern is that religions often, if I were to put it in a sentence, commit people to non-viable metaphysics that no longer serve as viable guides for them cultivating wisdom and meaning and community in a way that is reconcilable in a profound way with science, technology, and finally with the meta crisis that we face today. I don't see the world religions addressing the meta crisis in any of the degree to which they should be, given the tremendous existential, in both senses of the word, threat that the meta crisis faces. And so I think we need to exact what we can from the existing religions, avoid certain kinds of malformed metaphysics, and more properly direct ourselves towards alleviating the meaning crisis and addressing the meta crisis. So that would be my sort of overall elevator pitch, although it was a very long elevator ride.
That was a fantastic answer. Thank you. I feel like I know there's of course the videos and everything, but I haven't heard you personally like give a good definition of Retina up until now. That's so coherent and concise and puts everything together. So I think that perfectly encapsulates it, and it makes it a lot clearer for me. Yeah, I agree with it a lot there. Some I don't particularly hone in on, but yeah, I think that was a great example. So thank you for that, John.
Well, thank you. I mean, I want to be clear about my intent, and I preface it by saying I'm sure the community here has gone beyond all of that, both in scope and detail, and perhaps also in depth. And so I do not give that answer as any sort of straitjacket. I would hope that the people talking about Retina would at least enter into, deep discussion and dialogue with that schema that I provided you. But I don't think that they should be ultimately beholden to it in the sense that that is any kind of comprehensive or practical guide to how to proceed forward.
Thank you. Making Sense Together has a question. Hey John, I was discussing on Twitter with David Chapman whether there can be a coherent version of God in a Christian sense. And I said there's a way in by relating to the ground of being, by analogy of the person. How would you explain what I'm getting at if one isn't familiar with your thinking on the ground of being? And or can you recommend a text?
Yeah, I mean, so that the term itself is drawn from Tillich, and what Paul Tillich, the great Protestant theologian of the 20th century, in my opinion, one of the greatest theologians of the modern period, and the idea is to get something, basically an integration of ideas from the ancient Neoplatonic tradition, and Tillich is very aware of that. He's also aware of the Stoics. He's aware of Spinoza. That's clear in The Courage to Be. And then Heidegger's ontology and phenomenology, which Tillich was aware of and also critical of in certain important ways. So the idea ultimately goes back to an idea from Plato in the Republic, where he says that the good, the ultimate ground, the ultimate principle of reality is not itself, it's beyond being, it's not a thing. And so the basic idea here, this argument is very complex and very developed, literally over something approaching 1.5 millennia. But it goes basically closer to 2 millennia. Yeah, if you go all the way from Plato to Nicholas of Cusa, that's pretty much 2,000 years. So the argument is basically along the lines that the ultimate principle of reality, that which would make all things intelligible both individually and collectively, can't itself be a thing. This is the idea that, and this is part of Heidegger's critique, we shouldn't think of being as any particular being. So we shouldn't think of being, sort of often people say capital B, as any kind of particular being. This is part of what's called the critique of ontotheology. Thinking of God as the supreme being is to think of God as ultimately some kind of thing. Even if it's an immaterial thing, God would be a thing, and therefore God would be subject to the principles that govern all the things that have and could ever exist. Instead, the idea is the ground of all things cannot itself be a thing. It is no thing, where we get the idea of no thingness or nothingness, and that therefore we shouldn't try to talk about it as being, but as the ground of being, that which makes possible everything's being. And like I said, for Plato this was the good, for the Neoplatonists it was the good or the one, and they identified the two together. There have been a lot of proposals as to what this ultimate reality is. Tillich keeps it neutral in saying that we have an ultimate concern for ultimate reality that we understand by this sort of placeholder notion of the ground of being. It would be analogous to this. The laws are not things in the sense of objects, like E equals mc squared, force equals mass times acceleration. And whatever principle unites all the laws, the sort of laws of the laws, it wouldn't itself belong to the category of laws, because it would have to be the principles that make all laws possible. So it would have to be a principle of principles. It wouldn't be an object. It wouldn't be a law. And it would be something even more non-thingy. It would be a no thing in a really profound sense. And so that is sort of a way in which you can take somebody within, let's say, a naturalistic worldview, and you can say to them, well, science presupposes that the world is intelligible, and intelligibility presupposes that there's a unifying structure. The unifying structure means there's a unifying principle by which that ultimate structure exists, and that unifying principle can't itself be explained or understood, because it is that from which all explanation and understanding emerges, and therefore it is the ground of being, it is the ground of intelligibility, it is the ground of how things can be known, etc. And then Tillich's idea is that God, which is what you were talking about, God is a participatory symbol by which we try to come into right relationship with the ground of being. We try to understand God. We try to understand the ground of being by giving it an image that is always undermining itself as an image. So Tillich was particularly impressed by the biblical tradition of the prohibition on images and idolatry, so that whatever image or idea we form of God, we ultimately have to abandon as we keep stepping through each image, as if it was a doorway deeper and deeper into what we ultimately can only... It's something we can only ultimately be. It's not anything we can ultimately conceive, but ultimately we can be in right relationship to the ultimate ground of being. And for Tillich, that's his definition of faith. To ultimately care, to ultimately be concerned about ultimate reality, because that is the ground of everything else that we value and towards which we seek a relationship. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. Struan, you have a question for John.
Hey, John.
Hi, Strand.
Well, I just wanted to say that your answer to Jules put a big fat smile on my face. I'm really looking forward to seeing the rest of the series. I've been calling it, well, at least in my mind, it's just before after Socrates. So, anyway.
I love that. That was great. That's really good.
So I've been, I don't know, kind of threw a wrench in my plans with respect to the question that I had. I think I'm just going to go with another one that I had that was kind of more general. You mentioned, I think it was in a conversation with Paul Antliner, that there was 4 things that you were really worried about. And if I remember correctly, the one that you mentioned was how to keep the whole Dialogos project geared towards wisdom. And then,
Yes.
but what I wanted to know is, what is the other 3?
Oh, I have to go back to the context of that particular conversation.
Okay, well, if there's not if there isn't 3 other vexing things that are on your mind, then it's probably not a very
There's
good
lots of
question,
excellent things on my mind, but there's a specific. I have a meta memory of the context, Struan, but I can't get access to the specific perspectival episodic memory right now. I'm sorry. I've just done so
Okay.
many conversations since then. It's sort of blurred in my mind right now.
Yeah, no worries. For me, like trying to remember as well is also a bit difficult. Okay, so well, then how about this? Well, it's just a proposal that I've got. It's also pretty general, but I was thinking about the idea of purpose, because, well, you said meaning was I can't remember the 4th one. Sometimes you say 4, but it's the idea of connectedness, the idea of mattering, and then the sense of purpose. And the idea that I had was that you could.
And then there's also the fourth. The fourth is significance. There's a sense of depth or realness. You could be connected.
Right.
You could be connected. You could matter. You could have a sense of purpose, but that could all be undermined if you felt that it was all superficial and didn't have any depth or reality to it.
Okay, I'll have to think about that. But what struck me, at least with the other 3, the idea of of being connected to something greater could be defined as the relationship between or the relationship of the particular to the general, and then the mattering could be the reverse, the relationship of the general to the particular. And then if you have an articulation of those 2 things, then in any given situation you should be able to immediately be able to derive what the purpose of any given thing is. In other words, if you get to a situation and somebody says, what's the purpose of all of this, and you can't get an answer to that question, that's an indication that what you're doing is in fact meaningless. And I was thinking that maybe the whole purpose thing isn't, well, the reason that people focus on it is it's not the only thing that matters, but if the meaning...
I see what you're doing, though. Yeah.
Then
This is really good.
Yeah. So
you're saying it's diagnostic. You're saying it's a diagnostic, so that it diagnoses how well the other, well, at least the other 2, how well they have been articulated and developed. So although it's not right, it's a. But what you're saying then is the psychologists who are putting all 4 together are making a category mistake, because purpose is therefore not a member of it. Yeah.
Well, it might be a derivative of the other 2. Or at least it might not even be kind of related, but there's something there, and I at least think that this is, well, at least it strikes me that the whole fight about purpose is actually practically very useful, and we shouldn't just, but yeah, we should investigate it. It should be a diagnostic, I guess.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay.
I think that's really good,
Yeah,
Stuart. It's really good, because I've always been perplexed by the fact, I mean, part of it's historical. I think you'll grant me that. The Protestant work ethic and a bunch of things. Purpose became prominent. But there seems to be something else in people's intuition that wants to make purpose synonymous. And the data just doesn't support that. But what you're saying is that intuition might be slightly misplaced. The intuition might be trying to point out that purpose is a particular diagnostic on how well, I would want to say, how well the other 3 are being articulated and coordinated, and that's a very
yeah.
that's,
Like
yeah.
Well,
Go ahead.
practically speaking, if we're in a community together, we have to be able to figure out what it means to work together. If we work,
Yes.
like, is what we're doing together actually doing something useful? And
Yes.
well,
Yeah.
that's the purpose. And if you know the relationship between the individual and the general and the reverse, then you should be able to derive the purpose no matter what.
Right, but then it also means there's a special obligation if your argument's right, and I think it's on the right track, because simply stating the purpose is insufficient. You'd have to give some argument, right? You'd have to be able to explicate the purpose in terms of how it did of how it's doing the mattering and the connecting and the signification. You'd have to be able to say, well, we have this purpose because, and then articulate the
Yes,
others.
exactly.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what I'm saying is, if any of the other, well, two at least, I don't know about the third one, but possibly, if those go awry, then the sense of purpose, you won't be able to answer that question anymore necessarily.
Then you can
And
get a
that's
kind
the-
of, you can get
Well, that
Santayana's
in a-
definition. I was just going to say you can get Santayana's definition of fanaticism. Somebody who doubles their effort while losing sight of their goal, right? So if people, right, if they can't articulate it and yet they still pursue the purpose, that would, I mean, if Santayana is right, that would help to explain one way in which we can bullshit ourselves into fanaticism. That's very interesting. Did that make sense
Yeah,
to you?
well-
What I just did? Yeah, did it?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like it's a vain attempt to hold on to the meaning, because if you admit that you don't have a purpose, then the whole thing falls apart and you enter into a meaning crisis. So the fanaticism therefore becomes a defense mechanism, I think.
Yes, exactly. You're trying to forestall, right, the fact that, right, you can't actually articulate, no pun intended, the meaning of your purpose, and instead you redouble effort towards it.
Yeah.
I like this. This is really good. I like this. I think this is good.
Okay. Yeah. So, well, I need to think about it a bit more, because it doesn't quite gel well with my other frameworks. But yeah, it was just something that I wanted to run by you. So, but it sounds like it went well. So I'm very happy about that.
Yeah. No. I like that. It strikes me as a plausible explanation for why people mistakenly think of it as a synonym for all of meaning, precisely because it has this particular derivative diagnostic role. I think that's a very good answer.
Okay. Cool. Awesome.
Hey, Rampant
Thanks,
Tornado asks, in your series Aft MC and in your work on zombies, you frame much of your arguments within the context of the Western cultural context. My question is, in your opinion, how does the meaning crisis also manifest itself within the East Asian country context like Malaysia?
So, I mean, I hesitate to talk of where I'm empirically ignorant. I have some data about China, some data about Japan. So I'm doing a very questionable extrapolation from that along the following lines for the history we see. That insofar as science and technology and some of its attendant socio-political organizations of finance and democratic organization, and those will be adopted or rejected to varying degrees, which is part of the problem, part of the issue. Insofar as that is imported into any cultural milieu and setup, that society is going to face some kind of meaning crisis. Precisely because the meaning crisis is something that is endemic to the scientific worldview. It's based on this core ontological fact that science and scientists have no place within the ontology of the scientific worldview. And so the scientific worldview, for all of its power and majesty, and I'll remind people once again, I'm a scientist and I love being one, but for all of its power and majesty, it carries within it a profound ontological whole. And there will be temptations to fill that politically, to fill that with sort of, as we talked about earlier, a kind of moralism, to fill it with entertainment, distraction, to fill it with replacement gods like the market being the decider of all of what is real and is good. And I would predict that you will see these things happening in other cultures. However, There, of course, is going to be significant differences, as those cultures are, of course, not going to be coming out of a Christian heritage, might be coming out of a Buddhist heritage, Hindu, Muslim, other things. And so there's also going to be significant variation in how the traditional worldview can and cannot adapt to that confrontation with the scientific technological world. And so I think you'll get fundamentalisms of various kinds and pseudo-religious ideologies of various kinds. You'll get attempts to, you'll also get perhaps more creative and perhaps more successful than we were, attempts to reconcile axial age heritage with the scientific worldview. I know that there are clear versions of the meaning crisis taking place within Japan and within China, but there is also significant variation because China and Japan are not wrestling specifically with the loss of the Christian worldview. I would point out to you, though, that this issue came to a head in Japan with the loss of the Second World War and the clear destruction of the sort of sacred canopy that Japan had tried to keep preserved within its march towards modernization in science and technology. And that is why, even before the Second World War, you get the Kyoto School wrestling with the problem. The Kyoto School, Japanese philosophers, perhaps the greatest philosophical school in Japan, wrestling with nihilism, wrestling with the meaning crisis, and then you have it just going into high gear after the Second World War with Tanabe, philosophy as metanoetics, and of course it continues on with a lot of current work coming out of that heritage, wrestling with the kind of socioeconomic and cultural stagnation that has been facing Japan. So I won't go on and on. So there's reason to believe that this will spread as countries adopt. Japan is the clear historical example that I have studied as I don't know what to call them, non-Christian countries that did not come out of Christendom. That's what I'm trying to say. Confront the scientific technological worldview. You can't avoid it. I mean, you might be a little country like Bhutan and you can avoid it, and but you can't avoid it if you're going to be a large political economic nation. And so you can't avoid it, which means you can't avoid how that scientific worldview is going to launch you into the clutches of nihilism. Again, there's going to be significant variation on how countries try to deal with it. I mean, part of the problem that happened in Japan, right, was the attempt to try and keep together belief in the emperor literally being a god king and a kind of sacred canopy with modern science and technology, and that was held together by basically a military dictatorship nationalism, and that was very, very poor glue for trying to deal with the meaning crisis, which is why it was falling apart before the war and why the war just shattered it. And then the attempt to sort of out America in the 70s and the 80s then collapsed. And so there is, Japan is really hitting, a whole generation of people that don't want to grow up. China is facing something analogous, not identical, but analogous. There's a whole movement of people who won't get out of bed, who will just, and it sounds like the sort of a ridiculous thing, but this growing movement of people who just, who don't want to engage with the world, don't want to engage with work. They're basically, climbing up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Once people get out of poverty, and you should do everything you can, one more time, to get people out of poverty, and China has done a lot for that. But once you get people out of poverty, they start to turn to these deeper questions of meaning, and China is now facing that problem. And the problem that China faces is that its pseudo-religious mythology of communism and the revolution don't jive with how it's how it's actually being governed and ruled, and the actual practices that lifted China out of poverty. So China is on the verge, I think, of that meaning crisis that's already taking place very widely, very passively, becoming much more active and prominent. About countries specifically like Malaysia, I can't say as much because I don't know enough specifically about their history and about their current demographics and what's happening. So that's my best sort of extrapolation argument. With all the cautions that I already gave. Go ahead.
Great. Sepento asks, in the series, you characterize the human being as a general problem solver and approach the question as a good naturalist, cognitive scientist should. While I have no objections to what you said, isn't this position somehow still stuck in the having mode, saying that essentially we are to solve the problem of adaptation in order to survive? Portraying the human as environment adapters may still be part of the meaning crisis, or am I missing something?
That's a very good point. And so part of the issue that, if you'll allow me to rephrase it, and I hope this is not in any way malforming what you said. This is how I'm taking it, and this is how I'm honestly taking it, and I think this is a good point. The point, and this was a point that was originally brought against, James's version of pragmatism, which is like the ultimate normativity here seems to be the good is that which promotes adaptation, and why is adaptation good? Because it promotes survival, and isn't that just the having needs? Like we're just surviving, whereas the being needs are supposed to be about going beyond surviving. And this is a normativity issue that is, and this is not something unique to me by any means. Many people are leveling this against evolutionary psychology as, right, reducing beauty to a kind of symmetry that promotes reproductive survival, and reducing truth to whatever allows me to persuade other people so that I can pass on my genes. The problem with that, of course, goes to what I said earlier, right, is, but that means that the scientific theory, the evolutionary theory that you're using to make those arguments isn't true, and it's only how a group of people are trying to manipulate you so that they can better survive. And there's no beauty to that. There's no elegance. There's no way in which it plugs into the structures of reality at a more fundamental level. It's just a kind of salience bullshitting, so that, again, one group of people can manipulate another group of people, and the whole thing becomes radically self-undermining. And I think there's something fundamentally right about that. I was trying to, and I feel the criticism, I was trying to deepen the notion of survival to something more, I want to say, intrinsically valuable. I was trying to deepen the notion of survival via the notions of religio to, right, the survival of agency, and using agency and religio. And then, to be fair to me, I think, I followed up on this in the Elusive Eye series with Greg and with Greg Enriquez and Christopher Mastropietro, right, about personhood. And in the series I talked about that to Agape, that, right, the idea that we find personhood both deeply and inherently valuable in a way that is not the same as our own individual biological survival, such that I'm willing. And when I pose this argument to people, it's interesting how they respond. If we could produce, non-biological persons that were superior to us, and ultimately supplanted us, I think we're morally obligated to do so. I don't think our particular version, biological version, of primate personhood is ultimate. It's ultimate for us right now because there are no accessible, agreed upon other instances of personhood that we can point to. Of course, religious people will disagree with me here, but the issue is that the religious people also as deeply disagree with each other. So I'm going to leave that as neutral. Um, and then the question is, well, why view personhood that way? And that's where I get sort of a Heideggerian move, where I say we are the beings whose being is in question. That's what it is to be a person. That part of us is to be a self-defining, self-interpreting thing, and that means we have a special, unique relationship to reality, to the ground of being, that gives us a value above and beyond our biological survival. Now, notice the hesitancy of my voice all the way through. That is still an argument I'm not happy with. It depends on other things I'm working on, like the breakdown of the is-ought fallacy, trying to get a post-nominalist Neoplatonism going in order to provide a ontological and conceptual framework for strengthening that argument, giving it a real strong skeleton and scaffold. But that would be the gist. I do think that there is some way. Oh, let me be more cautious. I'm hoping that I can continue to build this argument that will give a final validation and valuation of human existence from the being mode and not just the having mode. That's a really, really good question, and I take it very, very seriously. And there's a sense in which a lot of the work I'm doing right now on sort of the fundamentals of a post-nominalist Neoplatonism are exactly around this issue of grounding the meaning, if you'll allow me that term in an extended sense, of human existence from within the being mode and not from within the having mode, of just meeting the having needs that are at the core of biological survival. So that's what I would say right now.
All right, Andre, can you read the next question?
So this question is from Manuel. He asks, what I've seen so far of Neoplatonism and the wisdom of Hypatia, it is trying to capture the relationship to the one in a system and then giving yourself expression as a path to get there. What I'm missing is a confirmation with ourselves that the Platonism keeps referencing gods as the source of the spiritual. So there is an implied interpretation that is never made explicit. Would it be fair to describe this as an expression of romanticism?
I think that's right. I think that's a very good point. I think the degree to which we do not enter into a serious discussion about Neoplatonic theology and not just Neoplatonic ontology is the degree to which we're avoiding that question rather than addressing it. And then there is a kind of romanticism going on there in a very profound way. Now, I mean, I am reading a lot in this tradition. I'm reading mystical monotheism, which is a tracing of Neoplatonic theology within what's been called, I think, mistakenly classical theism, the unknown God. I forget the Deidre, last name starts with a C. I'm also going through, and I'm doing Lectio Divina on Proclus's Elements of Theology, where he gives the Neoplatonic reinterpretation of the gods, and the gods are not just symbolic beings for Proclus. They are much more like the hyper objects that I've been talking about with Jordan Hall and with other people that you find in Timothy Morton's books, hyper objects. Although the hyper objects would extend more into the realm of real possibility and not just sort of actual, the realm of actuality. Sorry, that's too abstract. What I mean is we have to do a naturalism that is not just about what's derivable from our sciences, which is how naturalism is currently understood, but we also have to do a naturalism that radically commits, right, to what we're presupposing in our sciences. What ontology are we presupposing, and what can we derive from those presuppositions independently from what we derive from the existing sciences? So it's a much more comprehensive notion. And Neoplatonism, especially the later Neoplatonism of Proclus, was trying to do something along those lines and trying to understand these. Sorry, I don't want to. I have to say too much or too little. Basically, there's sort of metaphysical hyperobjects. Hyperobjects, like let's do, what is a hyperobject? A hyperobject is a distributed entity like global warming. You can't point to a specific spatio-temporal location. You can say vague things like it's on the Earth, but that's irredeemably inaccurate in certain ways. And the thing about hyperobjects is they're not sort of abstract entities like imaginary numbers or something like that, because global warming it's in your body. It's affecting why you're getting sunburned. It's affecting the temperature around you. So it's both beyond our normal way of thinking. We think in things. We think of in terms of objects. And this was one of the things that Neoplatonism was perpetually trying to break us free from. And Morton's point is, because we still think in objects, we're incapable of grasping hyperobjects. But many of the fundamental realities that we're facing, like global warming, or many of the fundamental principles that are responsible for our existence, like evolution, are hyperobjects. And then when you talk about hyperobjects not only at the physical level, but hyperobjects perhaps at the metaphysical level, like whatever it is that properly relates quantum mechanics and relativity together, such that the universe is not fundamentally fragmented in its generation of itself, then you're talking about things that a Neoplatonist would call a god. Now that's not ultimately the one. It's a high-level way in which the one is present as a metaphysical hyperobject, and then the actual physical hyperobjects like evolution and global warming would be gods as well. They'd just be lesser gods. And so whether or not you're happy with that designation, that was the way Neoplatonism tried to understand entities that we now tend to treat as if they were merely symbolic in the pejorative sense of the word. One of the ways of deepening this is to think about how, and this you find this perhaps in Jung, especially in the post-Jungians like Raff. Think about how there are hyper-objects within your psyche. That's what the archetypes are. That's what the self is in Jung. They're hyper-objects. They're psychic hyper-objects. And think about those conforming to external hyper-objects. So the deep within you calls to the deep within the world. When you get that sort of transjective relationship between the hyper-object within and the hyper-object without, that's much more closely, and this is very much what Proclus thought the gods were. And then you can see how the gods would afford anagoge. They would afford deep and profound reciprocal opening and help take you towards the one. And then that is how you could get the theory out of Romanticism, while also explaining how it would afford the cultivation of wisdom. Sorry, that was very compressed, and I was trying my best to say as much as I could without introducing too much novel jargon.
Thank you. Stian, one of your longtime patrons, has a question.
Yes.
I've asked you a few times before about psychopathologies and relevance realization, and I've gained a lot from your answers, particularly when you talked about the spectrum division between schizophrenia and autism, and how they differ in focus on detail and in contrast to the sum. But then how about ADHD?
Yep.
Someone without it just makes coffee in the morning. Someone with ADHD can be forced to have focus on first putting the frozen dried powder in the cup, then pouring the hot water and remembering it being hot, and then you stir it around.
Yeah.
So how does ADHD fit? So does ADHD fit anywhere on the spectrum?
So just one thing. The paper with Brett and Mark, and I've got a video with Mark. It just came out today. Brett and Mark Miller on the relevance realization, predictive processing, and autism and schizotypy. That paper is pretty much complete, and we're going to be submitting it very soon. Just to let people know that there'll be a paper that they can read connected to what Stian said. Now, the thing about ADHD and ADD, right, is it doesn't point on the spectrum. It points to a different dimension of relevance realization, namely its inherent transjectivity. Because I've been persuaded. I'm not, finally convinced, but I'm persuaded that the idea that ADHD is a cultural disorder, a cultural historical disorder, I've been persuaded of that. What do I mean by that? ADHD is an alteration of your salience landscape that moves you to interact with your environment in a particular way that we in our culture find disruptive because of the way our culture is sedentary and abstract symbolic. Many people have argued that the features of ADHD within a hunter-gatherer society, in which you have a fundamentally different way of being connected to your environment, those individuals would be high-status individuals in positions of leadership. They would be the best hunters. They would be the best warriors when that is needed, etc. Namely, that ADHD is not, in a profound sense, a disorder. It is instead the fact that form of adaptivity that was adaptive, that fit us to the environment for 99.9% of our history, of our biological history as a species, now has been suddenly misplaced by the sudden and rapid advent of sedentary civilization. And I happen to think that's right. So if you were in a different, if you were in the world that human beings have evolved into and in which they were biologically fitted, you would not in any way be diseased or disordered. Those words are distasteful in some sense, but because biological evolution happens much slower than the advent of civilization and a technological civilization such as ours, so that can support abstract symbolic worlds. Symbolic not in the religious sense, but just in the semiotic sense. In a real profound way, there's nothing wrong with the person that has ADHD. It's just that we've made a world around them, an artifactual and to some degree artificial world, that masks how adaptive their behavior is. So ADHD is directly a result of the transjective nature of religio, of connectedness, of relevance realization, and the fact that it is ultimately grounded in our biology, in the fact that we are autopoietic, autonomous, biological agents. And so that would be the connection I would draw between relevance realization and ADHD. We know that there are these displaced. This is a profound problem facing us. Right? We evolved to gorge on fat, right, and sugar and salt, because in the savannah in which we existed for, again, 99.5% of our biological history, that was a deeply adaptive trait. Now in our artifactual and artificial civilization, we are surrounded by a surfeit of fats and sugars and salty things, and so that adaptive feature has become maladaptive because we are displaced from the environment in which it works. It's very much like saying you take a shark and you drop it in the Sahara Desert, and then it's floundering around, and you're trying to diagnose the disease that it has. You're trying to, what's wrong with the shark? How is it malformed? How is its internal structure going wrong? There's nothing wrong with the shark. It has been displaced from its environment. Part of the problem we face is we are now ramping that up. There's going to be, here, I'll make a prediction. We are going to discover in the next 10 to 20 years, discover in scare quotes, also invent, right, a whole bunch of new disorders as we try to move people up into this further cyber environment that's even more displaced from their evolutionary environment. We'll find all kinds of cyber, right, disorders that people, and we're seeing it already happening. And so that's how I think you can understand things like ADHD from a relevance realization perspective, and why it predicts that we're going to get a whole new raft of these kinds of diseases and disorders as we attempt to lift the civilization up into cyberspace.
All right, thank you. I think that's all the questions we have time for today. We have a bunch of questions that we will carry over for next month, and we'll start off by not asking for new questions next month so we can catch up. But thank you, everybody, for giving their question. And thank you, John. And I'll pass it to Andre to close us out.
Thanks for coming, John. I have ADHD myself, and I'd very much like to read your paper at some point, if that's possible. And I'm interested in what you have to say. Thank you for coming. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. Some great questions tonight. And we will see you at the next Q&A, which you can find on the calendar. And thanks, John.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure being here. Thank you, everybody. Take good care, everyone.
Thanks. Have a great night.
You too.